Before the Erdtree rose golden and radiant over the lands between, before Queen Marika, the Eternal, claimed dominion over life and death, before the greater will ever cast its gaze upon this realm, there existed something older, something vast and primordial, a cosmic order whose very bones would become the foundation upon which everything you know as the Golden Order was built. And within those ancient, forgotten layers lies a truth that unravels the certainty of every god, every demigod, every faith that has ever taken root in this shattered world. The Erdtree itself, that towering beacon of divine authority, stands not as the first pillar of creation, but as a monument erected over ruins, over the remnants of powers that predate even the concept of the Elden Ring, and to grasp the full weight of what has been lost, what has been hidden, and what still stirs in the deep places beneath the earth and beyond the stars. You must understand that the story of the lands between is not a story of beginnings, but of cycles, of ages layered upon ages, of civilizations that rose and fell before the first golden light ever touched the sky. This is a tale that spans eons, from the churning chaos of the primordial crucible, where all life was one writhing, indistinct mass, to the arrival of an alien intelligence from the void between worlds, to the age when dragons ruled the skies and stone, to the establishment of the Golden Order and the reign of Marika, to the exile of the first Elden Lord and the banishment of his warriors into lands beyond the fog, to the cataclysmic night when the Elden Ring itself was shattered and the demigods turned upon one another in a war that would leave the realm in ruins, to the present moment when the tarnished, those who were cast out and stripped of grace, are called back from death itself to walk a land of rot and madness and fading light, and finally to the question of what comes next, what new age might be born from the ashes of the old, or whether the cycle will simply begin again, as it always has, as perhaps it always must. The lands between are a palimpsest, a manuscript written over and over, each new order attempting to erase what came before, yet the old words bleed through, the old truths persist in fragments, in ruins, in the songs of those who remember, and in the very structure of reality itself. For the Erdtree's roots do not reach down into virgin soil, but into the grave of something that came before, something that the greater will either destroyed or subsumed or built upon, depending on which scattered texts you believe, which ancient stones you read, which gods you choose to trust. You will hear the names of beings whose power shaped continents, of outer gods who vie for control of this realm from beyond the stars, of demigods born of Marika's unions, who inherited fragments of the Elden Ring and became lords of their own domains, each one a tyrant or a visionary or a monster or all three at once, and you will come to understand that the shattering was not an accident, but an inevitability, the natural conclusion of a system built on domination and the suppression of all that is wild, all that is free, all that refuses to conform to the rigid laws of the Golden Order. The history you are about to experience is not a simple march from past to present, but a labyrinth of cause and effect, of hidden motives and forgotten betrayals, of loves that twisted into curses and ambitions that curdled into madness, and at the center of it all stands Marika herself, the eternal queen, who ascended from origins shrouded in mystery to become the vessel of the Elden Ring, the living embodiment of order, and yet who, in an act that defies all understanding, shattered that very ring, plunging her realm into chaos and setting in motion the events that would lead to your return. The demigods who ward over the shards of the Elden Ring, the great runes, are not merely bosses to be defeated or obstacles to be overcome, but tragic figures, each one a reflection of some aspect of Marika's own fractured nature, each one corrupted by the power they claimed, each one unable to ascend to true lordship because they possess only fragments, only pieces, and a fragment of order is itself a kind of chaos. There is Godric the Grafted, who in his desperation for strength mutilated himself and countless others, fusing limbs and flesh in a grotesque parody of the Crucible's ancient unity. There is Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, who lost everything when her consort Radagon abandoned her to become Marika's second husband, and who now cradles a false egg in a library of sorcerers, lost in dreams of rebirth. There is Star-Scourge Radon, mightiest of the demigods, who held back the very stars themselves to protect his land from the fate they would bring, now reduced to a mindless beast consuming the corpses of friend and foe alike. There is Rykard, who fed himself to a great serpent in pursuit of a blasphemous path to godhood, becoming one with the creature in a union of ambition and hunger. There is Mohg, Lord of Blood, who seeks to raise his own age through a dynasty founded on a cursed outer god and the abducted body of his half-brother Miquella. And there is Malenia, Blade of Miquella, the undefeated swordswoman who bears the scarlet rot within her body, a plague that has consumed entire regions. A goddess of wars who has never known victory in the only battle that matters, the battle against her own decay. Each of these figures, and countless others, are threads in a tapestry so vast and so intricately woven that to pull at one is to feel the tension in all the others, and beneath them all, beneath even Marika and the greater will, there are older powers, older truths, the primordial crucible from which all life once flowed in chaotic harmony, the dragons, who were the first to wield the power of lightning and stone, the ancient civilizations that built the ruins you now explore, the Nox and the Numen and the giants and the ancestral followers, each one a remnant of an age that the Golden Order sought to erase, to bury, to forget. The Elden Ring itself is not a creation of the lands between, but an imposition upon it, a structure brought by the Elden Beast, the living vassal of the greater will, and embedded into the world, into Marika herself, transforming her into both queen and prisoner, both god long before the golden light of the Erdtree illuminated the lands between, long before the greater will cast its gaze upon this realm. There existed a time so ancient that even the stones have forgotten its true name. This is the age of the Crucible, the primordial era that predates all recorded history, all divine intervention, all order, as we would come to understand it. To speak of this time is to speak of beginnings, of the raw and unfiltered essence of life itself, before it was shaped, refined, or categorized by any higher power. The lands between, in this distant age, were not the fractured kingdoms and war-torn provinces you might recognize. They were something far more primal, a place where the very concept of separation between living things had not yet taken root. Imagine, if you will, a vast cauldron of existence, a primordial soup where the boundaries between species, between forms, between one creature and another were blurred to the point of meaninglessness. This was the Crucible, not merely a location or an object, but a state of being, a fundamental truth about the nature of life in its earliest expression. The Crucible itself was the primordial form of what would one day become the Erdtree, though to call it a tree would be to impose structure where none truly existed. It was a melting pot of life energy, a churning mass of potential from which all living things drew their essence. Where the Erdtree would later stand as a symbol of order, hierarchy, and divine purpose, the crucible was wild, chaotic in the truest sense, not destructive but simply unbounded by rules or limitations. Every form of life that would ever exist in the lands between had its origin here, in this swirling confluence of biological possibility. Within this primordial state, life energy flowed freely, unimpeded by the strictures that would later define the Golden Order. This energy did not discriminate, did not favor one form over another. It manifested in countless ways, expressing itself through physical characteristics that would later be seen as monstrous or aberrant. Wings sprouted from beings that walked the earth, horns curved from skulls in elaborate patterns, scales covered flesh that might otherwise have been smooth, tails extended from spines. These were not mutations or deformities, not in this age. They were simply expressions of the Crucible's boundless creativity, its refusal to be contained within narrow definitions of what life should be. The Crucible represented a singular, unified source of all life. There was no division between the noble and the base, the pure and the impure, the blessed and the cursed. All life was one, all drew from the same wellspring, all carried within it the potential for any form the Crucible might choose to express. This unity, this fundamental interconnection, was the defining characteristic of the age. Life was not yet organized into hierarchies or bloodlines. There were no chosen peoples, no divine right, no concept that one form of existence was inherently superior to another. In the skies above this primordial landscape, the ancient dragons held dominion. These were not the lesser drakes or wyverns that would populate later ages, but true dragons, beings of immense power and majesty, whose very existence seemed to embody the raw force of the Crucible itself. Their scales gleamed with a stone-like quality, their bodies wreathed in red lightning that crackled and danced across the heavens. They were worshipped not out of fear alone, though they were fearsome indeed, but out of recognition of their place in the natural order of this ancient world. The dragons were the apex of crucible life, the fullest expression of its power made manifest in flesh and scale and lightning. Among these ancient dragons, one stood supreme, Dragon Lord Placidusax, a being of such terrible majesty that even the fragmentary records that survive speak of him with reverence bordering on awe. Placidusax was not merely the mightiest of dragons. He held a title that would resonate through all the ages to come, a position that would be claimed by others in later eras, but which he was the first to bear. He was the Elden Lord, the consort and champion of the divine, though the nature of that divinity in this age remains shrouded in mystery. Before the Erdtree's reign, before the greater will made its influence known, before the Golden Order imposed its structure upon reality, Placidusax served as Elden Lord to a god whose identity has been lost to time. This ancient god, whoever or whatever they were, commanded the allegiance of the dragons and shaped the world through Placidusax's might. The Dragon Lord's seat of power was Farum Azula, a temple city that floated among the storm clouds, a place where time itself seemed to flow differently, where the architecture spoke of a civilization that understood principles of reality that would later be forgotten. From this lofty perch, Placidusax and his god oversaw an age of draconic supremacy, an era when the natural order was maintained not through laws and commandments, but through the raw, undeniable power of the ancient dragons. Yet the dragons were not the only champions of this primordial age. Walking the earth below, there emerged warriors who embodied the Crucible's power in a different form. These were the Crucible Knights, figures who would become legendary even in later ages when their true nature was no longer understood. The Crucible Knights were not merely soldiers trained in combat or nobles granted titles. They were born from the Crucible itself, or perhaps more accurately, they were shaped by it in ways that set them apart from ordinary beings. Their bodies carried the marks of the Crucible's influence, possessing its diverse aspects in ways that granted them extraordinary abilities. The 16 Crucible Knights, as they would come to be numbered, each bore different manifestations of the Crucible's power. Some possessed the aspect of the tail, a powerful appendage that could sweep enemies aside with devastating force. Others bore horns that could gore and impale. Still others had wings, though whether these granted the true flight or simply enhanced their leaping abilities, the records do not make clear. These physical characteristics were not cosmetic. They were expressions of genuine power, biological weapons, and tools that made the Crucible Knights formidable beyond measure. These knights served as champions of the Crucible's natural order, defenders of a world where the wild, untamed force of life was allowed to flourish without constraint. They fought not to impose order, but to protect the freedom of the Crucible to express itself in all its varied forms. Their armor, crafted in this ancient time, bore designs that would be replicated in later ages, but never truly understood by those who wore the copies. The original Crucible armor was not merely protective gear. It was a symbol of connection to the primordial source of all life, a physical manifestation of the bond between the knight and the Crucible itself. The power of the Crucible was universally seen as a blessing in this age. To bear the marks of the Crucible, to possess horns or wings or scales or any of the myriad forms it might grant, was to be touched by the very source of life itself. There was honor in these traits, strength, a visible sign of one's connection to the fundamental forces that animated all existence. Parents would have looked upon children born with such characteristics not with horror or shame, but with pride, recognizing in these physical manifestations a special relationship with the Crucible's power. Those beings who bore particularly strong Crucible aspects, individuals whose bodies expressed the primordial nature of life in especially pronounced ways, were not outcasts or cursed individuals in this era. They were simply people, perhaps even celebrated for the strength of their connection to the source. The concept that would later be known as the Omen Curse did not exist in this time. There was no curse, no stigma, no reason to hide or suppress these traits. An individual born with multiple horns, with scaled skin, with features that blended characteristics of different creatures, would have walked openly in society, their appearance a mark of the Crucible's favor rather than a sign of divine disfavor. The Crucible itself was a wild, untamed force, and this wildness was not seen as a flaw to be corrected, but as the natural state of existence. There were no strictures, no commandments carved in stone or written in golden light. The Golden Order, with its elaborate system of laws and hierarchies, Its careful delineation of what was permitted and what was forbidden, its obsession with purity and proper form, did not exist, could not exist, for the very concept was antithetical to the nature of the crucible. Life in this age was governed not by law, but by nature, by the raw dynamics of survival and power, by the honest brutality of the strong and the resilient adaptation of the weak. Ancient texts, fragments preserved through the ages, speak of the great tree, a concept closely associated with the primordial crucible. Some scholars who study these matters believe the great tree and the crucible are one and the same, different names for the same fundamental reality. Others argue that the great tree was a physical manifestation of the crucible, a literal tree of enormous size from which all life drew sustenance. Still others propose that the great tree was a predecessor to the crucible, an even earlier form of the source of life. The truth, lost in the mists of time, may never be fully known. What is clear is that both concepts point to the same essential idea, that there existed in the earliest age a unified source from which all life emerged, a wellspring of biological potential that had not yet been divided or categorized. The question of divine influence in this primordial age is one that troubles scholars and theologians alike. In later times, the concept of outer gods would become central to understanding the metaphysics of the lands between. These vast, incomprehensible entities, existing beyond the normal boundaries of reality, would compete for influence over the mortal realm, each seeking to shape it according to their own alien nature. But in the age of the crucible, the role of such beings is murky at best. Was there an outer god associated with the crucible itself? Did some vast entity guide the development of life in this primordial soup? Or was the crucible a purely natural phenomenon, life organizing itself without external direction? The evidence is contradictory and incomplete. Placidusac served as Elden Lord to a god, suggesting divine presence and purpose. Yet the nature of that god, whether they were an outer god in the sense that would later be understood, or something else entirely, remains undefined. The crucible's power seems almost too organic, too naturally chaotic, to be the work of a single guiding intelligence. It feels more like an emergent property of existence itself, life discovering its own potential through endless experimentation and variation. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between these extremes, a divine spark that ignited the crucible, but then allowed it to develop according to its own internal logic, without constant intervention or control. What can be stated with certainty is that this era predates the arrival of the greater will, the outer god that would come to dominate the lands between in later ages. The greater will, with its golden light and its emphasis on order, had not yet turned its attention to this realm. The Elden Ring, the physical manifestation of the greater will's power and the source of the Golden Order's authority, was not present in this age, or if it existed in a form so different from what it would become that it bore little resemblance to the artifact that would later define entire civilizations. The Golden Order itself, that elaborate system of laws and principles that would govern the lands between for countless years, was not even a concept in the minds of the beings who lived in this primordial time. This absence of the greater will's influence is crucial to understanding the age of the crucible. Without the imposition of external order, without a divine authority dictating proper forms and acceptable expressions of life, the Crucible was free to explore every possibility. The diversity of life in this age must have been staggering, far exceeding anything that would exist in later times. Creatures that combined features of multiple animals, beings that defied easy categorization, forms of life that would later be suppressed or eliminated as the Golden Order imposed its narrow vision of what life should be. All of these flourished in the primordial age. The landscape itself would have reflected this wild abundance. Forests, where the trees bore characteristics of animals, their bark scaled or furred, their branches ending not in leaves, but in feathers or fins. Oceans teeming with creatures that blurred the line between fish and beast, between plant and animal. Mountains where the stone itself seemed almost alive, pulsing with the same energy that animated flesh and blood. The lands between in this age were a place of wonder and terror in equal measure, beautiful in their untamed vitality, dangerous in their refusal to conform to safe, predictable patterns. The Crucible Knights moved through this world as its guardians and exemplars. Their role was not to tame the wildness or impose order upon chaos. Rather, they protected the Crucible's right to exist in its natural state, defending it against threats that might seek to constrain or corrupt it. What those threats might have been in an age before the arrival of competing outer gods is difficult to say. Perhaps they fought against beings who sought to claim the Crucible's power for themselves, to monopolize the source of life and deny it to others. Perhaps they battled against forces of true entropy, entities that sought not to order life, but to end it entirely, to return the lands between to a state of absolute lifelessness. The relationship between the ancient dragons and the Crucible Knights is another aspect of this age that remains somewhat unclear. Did they serve together, united in their defense of the primordial order? Or was there tension between them, a competition for dominance between the champions of the sky and the champions of the earth? The fact that both survived into later ages, that both the draconic traditions and the legacy of the Crucible Knights persisted long after the age of the Crucible had ended, suggests that they found some way to coexist, whether through cooperation or through maintaining separate spheres of influence. Placidus Sax himself, in his role as Elden Lord, may have been the bridge between these two forces. As a dragon, he embodied the might of his kind, their mastery of the skies, and their command of ancient lightning. Yet as Elden Lord, he served a higher purpose, one that transcended the interests of dragons alone. Perhaps his god was the Crucible itself, given consciousness and will, and his role was to ensure that all expressions of the Crucible's power, whether draconic or earthbound, whether scaled or furred or feathered, were protected and allowed to flourish. This age of the Crucible, for all its wildness and lack of structure, was not an age of constant warfare or chaos in the destructive sense. It was, in its own way, a time of balance, though a balance maintained through natural forces rather than imposed law. The strong survived and thrived, yes, but the Crucible's endless creativity ensured that strength took many forms, that there was no single path to power or survival. Adaptability was prized, the ability to embrace change and incorporate new aspects of the Crucible's power into oneself. Stagnation, rigid adherence to a single form, would have been a weakness in an age where life itself was fluid and ever-changing. As we stand at the threshold of this primordial age, Looking back across the vast gulf of time that separates us from it, we must understand that everything that follows, all the golden ages and dark times, all the wars and betrayals, all the rise and fall of kingdoms and gods, all of it has its roots here, in this time before time, when life was one and the crucible held all things in its wild embrace. Countless ages after the primordial crucible first stirred with chaotic life, the cosmos itself would turn its attention to the lands between. In the ancient past, during what we might call the era of cosmic arrival, the very fabric of existence in this realm would be fundamentally rewritten by forces from beyond the stars. A cosmic entity of immense power, known as the Greater Will, cast its gaze upon the lands between. This outer god, dwelling somewhere in the vast emptiness beyond mortal comprehension, sought to impose its vision of perfect order upon the world. The Greater Will was not merely a god in the traditional sense, but rather a fundamental force of the universe, an intelligence so vast and alien that its true nature remains incomprehensible to those bound by flesh and time. It perceived the chaotic energies of the crucible, the wild and untamed life that flourished without structure or hierarchy, and deemed it necessary to impose control. To achieve this monumental task, the Greater Will would not descend itself. Instead, it sent a vassal, a living weapon, and emissary that would carry its will across the infinite void and into the heart of the lands between. This vassal was the Elden Beast, and its arrival would change everything. The Elden Beast descended from the stars as a golden star, a celestial phenomenon that would have been visible across the entire realm. Imagine, if you will, the ancient inhabitants of the lands between looking up to witness a golden light streaking across the heavens, growing brighter and larger as it approached. This was no mere meteor or falling star. This was a living god, a creature of pure cosmic energy wrapped in golden radiance. The impact of its arrival, though we have no records of the exact location, must have been catastrophic in its own right. Yet it was only the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the world at its most fundamental level. The Elden Beast itself embodies the concept of order with a capital O. This is not simply the idea of rules or laws as we might understand them, but rather the very principle that reality should follow predictable patterns, that cause should lead to effect, that the universe should operate according to consistent principles rather than the wild chaos of the crucible. The beast is not merely a servant of order. It is order made manifest, given form and purpose. Its body, when glimpsed by those few who have survived an encounter with it, appears as something between a dragon and a cosmic serpent. Its flesh seemingly composed of stars and golden light, constantly shifting and reforming as if it exists partially outside the normal flow of space and time. Most crucially, the Elden Beast becomes the living embodiment of the Elden Ring itself. Here we must understand what the Elden Ring truly is. It is not simply a physical object, though it can be perceived as such. The Elden Ring is a metaphysical construct, a set of fundamental laws written into the very code of reality. Think of it as the operating system of existence itself. Before the Elden Ring, the lands between operated according to the wild principles of the crucible, where life blended and merged without clear boundaries. The Elden Ring would impose boundaries, categories, hierarchies. It would separate life from death, light from dark, order from chaos. The Elden Beast, carried this ring within its own body, or perhaps more accurately, the Elden Beast was the ring given consciousness and will. With the establishment of the Elden Ring, the fundamental laws of the world were dictated and enforced. Life would follow certain patterns. Death would have meaning and consequence. Souls would be bound to the Erdtree, the great golden tree that would soon dominate the landscape. The concept of grace, that golden light that guides certain individuals toward greatness or toward the fulfillment of the greater will's designs, was introduced as part of this new cosmic order. Grace would mark those who were favored, those who had a role to play in the grand design. To lose one's grace, to become tarnished, would mean to exist outside this divine plan, to be cast out from the light of the Erdtree. Upon the foundation of the Elden Ring, the Golden Order was established. This was both a religious doctrine and a cosmic law, a system of belief that reflected the actual structure of reality as enforced by the ring. The Golden Order taught that all things had their proper place, that hierarchy was natural and divinely ordained, that the greater will's design was perfect and should not be questioned. It established the primacy of gold, both as a literal substance and as a symbol of divine favor. Golden light became the marks of holiness, of righteousness, of alignment with the cosmic order. Those who served the Golden Order, who upheld its principles and enforced its laws, would be blessed with power and long life. Those who opposed it would be branded as heretics, as enemies of reality itself. As the Elden Ring took hold and the Golden Order solidified its metaphysical grip on the world, the Erdtree began to grow. This was not a natural tree in any conventional sense, though it appeared as one. The Erdtree was a cosmic structure, a living conduit for the power of the Elden Ring, drawing energy from the ring itself and channeling it throughout the lands between. Its roots, both visible and invisible, spread beneath the entire realm, connecting to every living thing, every soul, every spark of life. The Erdtree grew to an enormous size, dwarfing mountains, visible from every corner of the lands between. Its golden leaves shimmered with divine light, and its trunk was said to be harder than any metal, impervious to any weapon forged by mortal hands. The Erdtree became the central symbol of the new order, both literally and figuratively. It stood at the heart of what would become Leyndell, the royal capital, and all roads, all pilgrimages, all quests for power would eventually lead to its base. The Erdtree was not merely a symbol, however. It served a vital function in the Golden Order's system. When beings died in the lands between, their souls would return to the Erdtree, absorbed into its roots, their essence recycled and eventually reborn. This was the promise of the Golden Order, that death was not an ending, but a transition, that all would return to the Erdtree and be remade. The tree glowed with the accumulated souls of countless generations, and its sap, the golden amber that would drip from its branches, contained concentrated divine power. Yet the Erdtree did not spring from nothing. The primordial crucible, that melting pot of all life that had existed since the dawn of the world, predated both the Erdtree and the Golden Order. In fact, scholars and theologians of later ages would debate the exact relationship between the crucible and the Erdtree. Some believed the Erdtree grew from the crucible, that it was the crucible refined and purified, its chaotic energies focused and controlled. Others argued that the Erdtree was something entirely separate, imposed upon the world from outside, and that it merely drew upon the crucible's power without truly being part of it. The truth likely lies somewhere between these interpretations. The crucible represented raw, undifferentiated life force, the potential for all forms and all possibilities. The Erdtree represented that same life force channeled, organized, made to serve a specific purpose and follow specific rules. As the Erdtree's power grew, spreading its golden light across the lands between, the crucible's influence began to wane. This was not a sudden change, but a gradual suppression that took place over countless years. The raw, chaotic energies that had once allowed life to take any form, to blend and merge and transform without limit, were pushed back, contained, diminished. The aspects of the crucible, those primal characteristics that had been common in the age before the Erdtree, became increasingly rare. Horns, tails, wings, the blending of human and beast characteristics, these were once natural expressions of the crucible's power. Under the Golden Order, they became aberrations, signs of impurity, marks of those who had not fully embraced the new order. The Crucible Knights, elite warriors who had served in the earliest days of the Golden Order, bore these crucible aspects as a mark of their ancient heritage, but even they would eventually be viewed with suspicion by later generations who had forgotten or rejected the crucible's role in the world's history. Life within the lands between began to coalesce and evolve under the Erdtree's golden grace, taking on new forms that aligned with the principles of the Golden Order. Humans, or at least beings resembling humans, became the dominant form of intelligent life. They were granted grace, that golden light in their eyes that marked them as favored by the greater will. They built civilizations, established kingdoms, created art and culture and law, all under the benevolent glow of the Erdtree. The demigods, powerful beings born of gods and blessed with fragments of the Elden Ring itself, would emerge as rulers and champions of this new age, but their time was still far in the future. In these early days, the focus was on establishing the order itself, on ensuring that the Erdtree's roots grew deep and its influence spread wide. Not all beings in the lands between welcomed this transformation. The ancient dragons, who had once ruled the lands between with absolute authority, found themselves challenged by the nascent Golden Order. These were not the lesser drakes or wyverns that would populate the realm in later ages, but true dragons, beings of immense power and intelligence who commanded lightning itself. The dragons had their own civilization, their own laws, their own understanding of the world. They recognized no authority higher than their own dragon lord, and they viewed the arrival of the Elden Beast and the establishment of the Golden Order as an invasion, an imposition of alien rules upon their domain. The dragons were ancient even by the standards of the Crucible, having existed since time immemorial, and they possessed a form of immortality through their stone scales, which allowed them to persist even beyond death in a petrified state. Placidusax, the Dragon Lord, ruled from Farum Azula, a massive city that existed outside of normal time, floating in a storm beyond the edges of the world. The dragons watched as the Erdtree grew and the Golden Order spread, and they understood that this new power threatened their supremacy. Yet in these early days, open conflict had not yet erupted. The dragons were patient, observing, waiting to see how this cosmic order would develop and whether it could be challenged or must be accommodated. Their time of reckoning with the Golden Order would come, but not yet. For now, they remained in their ancient strongholds, their lightning crackling in the storm clouds, a reminder that the Erdtree's light had not yet illuminated every corner of the realm. The giants, who dwelt in the cold mountains of the north, also resisted the encroachment of the Erdtree's influence. These massive beings, each standing several times the height of a man, worshipped their own god, the fell god of fire. The giants maintained the flame of ruin, a great bonfire that burned atop the highest peak of their mountain home. This flame represented a power fundamentally opposed to the Golden Order, a force of destruction and chaos that could burn even the Erdtree itself if unleashed. The giants understood that the Golden Order sought to impose its will upon all things, to bring all under the light of grace and the rule of the Elden Ring. They rejected this vision, absolutely. Their god was a god of fire and fury, not of golden light and ordered hierarchies. The giants fortified their mountain strongholds, tended their sacred flame, and prepared for the inevitable conflict they knew must come. They could see the Erdtree growing in the distance, its golden light spreading like a disease across the lands they had known since ancient times, and they knew that the greater will would not tolerate their independence forever. The ancestral spirits, those ethereal beings tied to the primordial crucible, found their power diminished by the new order as well. Those spirits represented the souls of ancient beasts and beings from the age of the crucible, entities that existed in a state between life and death, neither fully material nor fully ethereal. They haunted the forests and ruins of the lands between, particularly in places where the crucible's influence had been strongest. The ancestral followers, humans who revered these spirits and sought to maintain the old ways, continued their rituals and worship even as the Golden Order spread. They carved their prayers into stone, performed their dances under the light of the moon rather than the Erdtree, and hunted with weapons blessed by the spirits rather than by grace. But they could feel the change in the world, the way the spirits grew weaker, less responsive, as if the very fabric of reality was being rewritten to exclude them. The concept of grace as a guiding light for individuals became central to the Golden Order's relationship with the people of the lands between. Grace was not simply divine favor in an abstract sense. It was a tangible phenomenon, a golden light that shone in the eyes of those blessed by the greater will, and more importantly, a light that would appear in the world itself, guiding the graced toward their destiny. If you were graced, you would see these golden lights pointing the way forward, leading you to places of power, to encounters that would shape your fate, to the fulfillment of whatever role the greater will had designed for you. This was both a blessing and a burden. To be graced meant you had purpose, that your life had meaning in the grand design, but it also meant you were not entirely free. Your path was laid out before you, and to stray from it was to risk losing grace entirely, to become tarnished, cast out from the light. The lands between began their transformation from a primordial state to one governed by the Golden Order, a process that would take countless generations to complete. Villages and towns sprang up in the shadow of the Erdtree, their inhabitants living according to the principles of the Golden Order. Temples and churches were built to honor the greater will and to teach the doctrines of the new faith. Knights and warriors swore oaths to uphold the order, to protect the faithful, to expand the light of grace to every corner of the realm. Scholars studied the nature of the Elden Ring, attempting to understand the fundamental laws it imposed, seeking to align their knowledge with divine truth. The transformation was not uniform or instantaneous. In remote regions, the old ways persisted. In the depths of the earth, in forgotten ruins, in the hearts of mountains, the crucible's power still flickered. But the tide had turned. The Golden Order was ascendant, and the age of chaos was giving way to an age of law, of hierarchy, of divine purpose imposed from the stars themselves. Following the Elden Beast's arrival and the establishment of the Greater Will's dominion, the ancient world of the lands between would not simply bow to this new cosmic authority. In the era known as the Dragon War, a period stretching across centuries of the ancient past, the existing powers that had ruled since time immemorial would clash with the Greater Will's ambitions in a conflict that would reshape the very foundations of reality itself. Long before the Golden Order, before the Erdtree cast its radiant glow across the realm, the lands between belonged to the ancient dragons. These were not mere beasts, but divine entities of immense power and intelligence, creatures whose scales gleamed like polished stone, and whose very breath could rend the earth asunder. The dragons worshipped and drew their strength from the primordial crucible, an ancient wellspring of life energy that predated even the Greater Will's influence. The crucible represented something fundamentally different from the ordered, hierarchical power that the Greater Will sought to impose. Where the Greater Will demanded structure and divine law, the crucible embodied raw, chaotic vitality, the primordial soup from which all life emerged in its most unrefined and potent form. The crucible itself was the primordial form of what would later become the Erdtree, though in this ancient age it bore little resemblance to the golden tree that would eventually dominate the landscape. The crucible was the source of all life and power in the lands between, a churning font of creation from which sprang forth beings of every conceivable form. From the crucible came creatures with horns, tails, and wings, beings that blended characteristics in ways that would later be deemed impure or aberrant by the Golden Order's strict doctrines. The energy of the crucible flowed through everything, connecting all living things in a web of primordial power that knew no distinction between noble and base, pure and impure. It was a force of absolute creative potential, unbound by the laws and restrictions that would later define existence under the Greater Will's reign. The ancient dragons, led by the mighty dragon lord Placidusax, ruled the lands between from their seat of power in Farum Azula, a magnificent city that floated among the storm clouds, suspended in the sky through ancient magics that even now remain poorly understood. Placidusax himself was a being of incomprehensible might, a dragon with multiple heads who served as Elden Lord to a god whose identity has been lost to the erosion of time itself. Some scholars believe this forgotten deity was an aspect of the crucible itself, a god of primordial chaos who held dominion before the Greater Will ever cast its gaze upon the lands between. Farum Azula, in its glory, was a testament to draconic civilization, a city of towering spires and ancient temples where the dragons conducted their mysterious rites and maintained their eternal vigil over the realm below. But the Greater Will had chosen its vessel, its instrument through which the Golden Order would be established and enforced. Marika, a figure whose origins remain shrouded in mystery and contradiction, was selected to become a goddess, elevated from whatever mortal or immortal state she previously occupied to serve as the earthly embodiment of the greater will's authority. The exact circumstances of Marika's ascension are debated among scholars. Some texts suggest she was a member of the Numen race, a people of extraordinary longevity who came from beyond the lands between. Others hint at darker origins, at sacrifices made and prices paid that would haunt her throughout the ages to come. What remains certain is that Marika, upon receiving the greater will's blessing and becoming the vessel for the Elden Ring, transformed into Queen Marika, the Eternal, a being of divine power tasked with establishing the Golden Order across all the lands between. The Golden Order that Marika would establish represented a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. Where the Crucible had allowed for chaos and diversity, the Golden Order imposed structure and hierarchy. It was a system of laws, both physical and metaphysical, a framework that would govern not just how people lived, but the very nature of life and death itself. The Golden Order decreed that death would follow certain rules, that souls would return to the Erdtree to be reborn, that the world would operate according to divine principles rather than the wild unpredictability of the Crucible. But to establish this new order, the old powers would need to be subjugated or destroyed. Marika understood that divine authority alone would not be sufficient to conquer the lands between. She needed a champion, a warrior of such overwhelming might that he could face the ancient dragons themselves and emerge victorious. She found that champion in Godfrey, a warrior of legendary prowess whose origins were as humble as his eventual station would be exalted. Before he became the first Elden Lord, before he took the name Godfrey, he was known as Huara Lu, a chieftain of the Badlands, a man who fought with such savage ferocity that he wrestled with beasts using nothing but his bare hands. His strength was not merely physical, but spiritual, a force of will so powerful that manifested as visible golden light around his body when he entered battle. Yet Godfrey's raw power came with a dangerous edge. His battle lust, his sheer love of combat and violence, threatened to consume him entirely. To temper this savage nature, while still preserving his martial might, Marika gifted him with a companion, a creature known as Seirosh, the Lord of Beasts. Seirosh took the form of a great lion who clung to Godfrey's back, not as a burden, but as a regulator, a living seal that contained the warrior's most destructive impulses. With Seirosh's presence, Godfrey could channel his ferocity into controlled, purposeful violence rather than mindless slaughter. This transformation from Huara Lu to Godfrey represented more than a change of name. It symbolized the taming of the wild, the imposition of order upon chaos, the very principles that the Golden Order sought to enforce upon the entire world. Marika's task for Godfrey was clear and uncompromising. He was to unite the lands between under the Golden Order, to bring every kingdom, every tribe, every power, both great and small, under the dominion of the Erdtree. This was not a mission of diplomacy or peaceful conversion. This was conquest, pure and simple, a campaign of subjugation that would see Godfrey wage war across the entirety of the known world. And the first and greatest obstacle to this vision was the ancient dragons themselves, the old rulers who would never willingly surrender their dominion to this upstart goddess and her cosmic patron. The war against the dragons was unlike any conflict the lands between had ever witnessed. Godfrey led his forces with tactical brilliance and personal valor, charging into battle at the head of his armies, his axe cleaving through dragon scales that could turn aside ordinary weapons as easily as cloth. His warriors, hand-picked for their courage and skill, followed him into impossible battles against foes that could incinerate entire battalions with a single breath of ancient lightning. Among these elite fighters were the Crucible Knights, warriors who bore a fascinating contradiction in their very nature. They served the Golden Order and fought for its establishment, yet they wielded powers derived from the very crucible that the Golden Order would eventually seek to suppress. The Crucible Knights were clad in armor that seemed to grow from their bodies as much as cover them, bronze and gold plates that bore the aesthetic of ancient, organic growth. They possessed abilities that marked them as touched by the primordial crucible itself. Some could sprout horns and charge their enemies with the force of a raging bull. Others grew tails that they wielded as additional weapons, lashing out with appendages that seemed to have minds of their own. These manifestations of crucible power were seen in this ancient age as marks of honor and strength, signs that a warrior had been blessed by the fundamental forces of life itself. Only later, as the Golden Order solidified its doctrines and grew more rigid in its definitions of purity, would such traits be viewed with suspicion or outright revulsion. The battles between Godfrey's forces and the ancient dragons raged across the lands between, from the storm-racked peaks where dragons made their nests to the valleys below where human settlements cowered beneath the shadow of warring titans. Dragons fell from the sky, their massive bodies crashing to earth and creating craters that would remain as landmarks for millennia to come. But the dragons did not fall easily. Each one was a battle unto itself, a creature of such power that it might take dozens of warriors to bring down a single dragon, and even then only at terrible cost. The earth was scorched by dragon fire and ancient lightning, entire landscapes transformed by the fury of their death throes. Yet amid the carnage and conflict, something unexpected occurred. Lanceax, a female ancient dragon of considerable power and grace, formed a bond with one of the heroes of the Golden Order. The exact nature of this relationship has been the subject of much scholarly debate and romantic speculation. Some texts suggest it was a friendship born of mutual respect between warriors. Others hint at something deeper, a connection that transcended the boundaries of species and allegiance. What is known is that Lanceax's counterpart was closely associated with Fortisax, another ancient dragon who would later become famous for his own bond with Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn son. These connections between dragons and the champions of the Golden Order represented the first cracks in what might otherwise have been a war of total annihilation, the first suggestions that coexistence might be possible. The war reached its climax in a series of battles that saw Godfrey face the mightiest of the ancient dragons in single combat. The details of these confrontations have been lost to time or deliberately obscured, but their outcomes are clear. One by one, the great dragons fell or fled before Godfrey's might. Even Dragon Lord Placidusax, the ancient Elden Lord of a forgotten age, was defeated, though not destroyed. In his defeat, Placidusax retreated beyond time itself, entering a state of existence outside the normal flow of temporal reality. There he would wait, his multiple heads reduced to stumps, where some had been torn away in battle, lying in an eternal slumber in the ruins of Farum Azula, waiting for the return of the god he had served, a god who may never have existed, or who may have been erased from reality so thoroughly that even memory of their name has vanished. With the defeat of the dragons, Godfrey's conquest of the lands between was all but complete. Other forces would resist, other wars would be fought, but the breaking of dragon dominion represented the true turning point, the moment when the old order gave way irrevocably to the new. In recognition of his achievements and to cement the legitimacy of the Golden Order, Godfrey was elevated to a position that had not existed since Placidusax's ancient reign. He became the first Elden Lord of the New Age, consort to Queen Marika, standing at her side as the earthly embodiment of the Golden Order's military and temporal power, while she represented its divine and spiritual authority. The Erdtree, which had begun as a transformation of the primordial crucible, now flourished across the lands between in its new form. Where the crucible had been wild and chaotic, the Erdtree was ordered and radiant, a massive golden tree whose roots spread beneath the entire realm and whose branches seemed to touch the heavens themselves. The Erdtree became the center of existence in the lands between, the axis around which all life revolved. Souls of the dead would return to the Erdtree, absorbed into its golden light, and from the Erdtree new life would emerge. It was a closed system, a perfect cycle that reflected the greater will's vision of order and control. The light of the Erdtree reached into every corner of the realm, and under its glow, the Golden Order established its laws and hierarchies. Yet the transition from the Age of Dragons to the Age of the Golden Order was not as absolute as it might have appeared. Marika, or perhaps Godfrey, or perhaps both together, recognized that complete annihilation of the dragons would be both wasteful and potentially dangerous. The dragons possessed a knowledge and power that could be valuable, and their total destruction might create martyrs and fuel resistance that would take generations to suppress. Moreover, there were those among the Golden Order's champions who had formed genuine bonds with individual dragons, relationships that complicated any policy of wholesale genocide. The solution came through Godwyn the Golden, the firstborn son of Queen Marika and Lord Godfrey. Godwyn was everything the Golden Order aspired to be made flesh. He was noble, courageous, beautiful, and powerful, a prince who seemed to embody the very best qualities of both his divine mother and his warrior father. But Godwyn possessed something that set him apart from the mere martial prowess of his father or the cold divinity of his mother. He had compassion, a genuine ability to see worth and value in those who might otherwise be considered enemies or inferiors. When Godwyn encountered the surviving dragons, rather than seeking to destroy them, he extended an offer of friendship and alliance. The dragon Fortisax, brother in spirit if not in blood to the Lansaics, who had already formed bonds with the Golden Order's champions, became Godwyn's closest companion. Their friendship was legendary, spoken of in songs and stories throughout the lands between. Fortisax, a dragon of red lightning and ancient power, saw in Godwyn a kindred spirit, a being of honor who valued loyalty and courage above mere dominance. Through this friendship, a broader peace was brokered between the remaining dragons and the Golden Order. It was not a peace of equals, to be certain. The dragons had been defeated, their dominion broken, their god lost to time. But it was a peace that allowed them to survive, to maintain some measure of dignity and autonomy, even in their diminished state. From this peace emerged the dragon cult, a formal institution that allowed some dragons to coexist with the Golden Order and even be venerated within its structures. The dragon cult established temples and rituals, teaching certain chosen humans the arts of dragon communion and the use of dragon incantations. These were powerful magics, spells that called upon the ancient lightning of the dragons, abilities that had once been the exclusive province of the ancient dragons themselves. The most devoted followers of the dragon cult could even begin to transform themselves, taking on draconic characteristics, their eyes turning golden and their bodies beginning to scale over as they became something between human and dragon. This accommodation of the dragons represented a flexibility in the early Golden Order that would later be lost. In these ancient days, the Golden Order was still finding its form, still determining what it would allow and what it would forbid. The Crucible Knights still bore their horns and tails with pride. The dragons still flew through the skies, albeit in smaller numbers and with an understanding of their place in the new hierarchy. There was room for diversity, for different paths to power and glory, as long as all ultimately served the greater will and acknowledged the supremacy of Queen Marika and the Erdtree. The age of the dragons had ended, but it had not been entirely erased. Instead, it had been incorporated, transformed, made part of the new order that Marika and Godfrey were building. The lands between stood united under the Golden Order, the Erdtree's light shining across every kingdom and principality, and for a time it seemed as though this peace might last forever, that the age of conflict had given way to an eternal golden age of prosperity and order. But the seeds of future tragedy had already been planted, in compromises made, and powers that refused to be fully tamed, in the very nature of the order that had been established through conquest and force. The wheel of fate continued to turn, and the age of peace would prove far more fragile than anyone could have imagined. As the Crucible era began to wane, giving way to the ancient past and the nascent Golden Order, a new cosmic influence began to assert itself upon the lands between. The Greater Will, an outer god of immense power and an unseen guiding hand, dispatched its most formidable emissary, the Elden Beast. This ethereal, golden entity, a living embodiment of the very concept of order, descended from the cosmos, its arrival marking a pivotal moment in the history of the lands between. It was not merely a creature, but a celestial mechanism, a divine instrument designed to establish and maintain a specific cosmic order. Its presence was the foundational act, the very bedrock upon which the Golden Order would be built, dictating the fundamental principles that would govern existence in this land. The Elden Beast was, in essence, the Greater Will's direct intervention, a physical manifestation of its will, imbuing the world with a new set of rules and a new understanding of divinity. Its nature was complex, a living star, a manifestation of the Erdtree's primordial form, a being of pure golden light and cosmic power, its very essence shaping the reality around it. With the Elden Beast's arrival, the stage was set for the ascension of Queen Marika, the Eternal. A figure of immense power and ambition, Marika, guided by the Greater Will's influence, began to systematically dismantle the old ways and establish her own dominion. She was not merely a monarch, but a prophetess, a chosen vessel through whom the greater will's design would be implemented. Her vision, imbued with the cosmic authority of the Elden Beast, was the Lalsung Golden Order, a new religious and political system that would fundamentally reshape the lands between. This order was not merely a set of laws or a philosophical framework. It was a comprehensive worldview, a divine mandate that sought to bring all aspects of life, from the smallest blade of grass to the grandest empire, under its golden banner. Marika, with her unwavering conviction and formidable power, became the architect of this new era, her every action meticulously aligned with the greater will's cosmic blueprint. She was a figure of immense charisma and strategic genius, able to rally diverse factions and impose her will with a blend of divine authority and sheer force. Her rise was not accidental. It was a deliberate and calculated move, a testament to her profound understanding of power and her unyielding devotion to the greater will's grand design. The Golden Order, under Marika's unwavering leadership, quickly began to dictate the very laws of the lands between. These laws were not arbitrary decrees, but were intrinsically linked to the Elden Ring itself, the fundamental concept of order and causality in this world. The Elden Ring, a powerful artifact of immense cosmic significance, was more than just a symbol. It was the very fabric of reality, a collection of great runes that governed life, death, and everything in between. The Golden Order's tenets were derived directly from the principles embodied within the Elden Ring, making them not merely legal statutes, but divine ordinances. Every aspect of society, from the succession of power to the cycles of nature, was to be understood and governed through the lens of the Golden Order and its connection to the Elden Ring. Marika, as the vessel of the Elden Ring, held ultimate authority, her interpretations and pronouncements shaping the destiny of the entire realm. The Golden Order became a pervasive force, influencing every facet of existence, from the grand pronouncements of the Queen to the daily lives of the common folk. Its principles were taught in every school, preached in every temple, and enforced by every lord, creating a unified and rigidly structured society under Marika's divine rule. One of Marika's most audacious and consequential acts, one that would forever alter the very nature of existence in the lands between, was her decision to remove the rune of death from the Elden Ring. This act was not a mere administrative change, but a profound manipulation of cosmic law. The rune of death, also known as destined death, represented the natural cycle of life and demise, the inevitable end that awaited all living things. By excising it, Marika sought to transcend the limitations of mortality, to create a world where true death was a rare and unnatural occurrence. She entrusted this formidable power to her shadow-bound beast, Malekith, the Black Blade, a loyal and fearsome warrior who became the sole keeper of destined death. Malekith, consumed by his duty, sealed the rune of death away within his own being, becoming its eternal guardian. This act had immediate and far-reaching consequences. It fundamentally altered the concept of death. No longer did beings truly perish. Instead, their souls would return to the Erdtree, their bodies merely inert vessels. This new reality gave rise to the phenomenon of those who live in death. Individuals whose souls, having been denied their natural passage, became trapped in a state of undeath, their bodies reanimated but devoid of true life. These unfortunate souls, often seen as abominations by the Golden Order, were a direct consequence of Marika's ambition to defy the natural order, a testament to the profound and sometimes unforeseen repercussions of tampering with cosmic laws. The removal of the Rune of Death was a bold statement, a declaration that the Golden Order, under Marika's guidance, could even bend the fundamental laws of existence to its will, albeit with a heavy and enduring cost. With the Rune of Death sequestered, the Erdtree solidified its position as the central pillar of the Golden Order. This colossal, incandescent tree, its golden leaves shimmering with divine light, became the ultimate symbol of Marika's reign and the greater will's influence. Its roots delved deep into the earth, its branches reaching towards the heavens, connecting all aspects of the lands between. The Erdtree was not merely a magnificent natural wonder, it was a living, breathing manifestation of the Golden Order's power. Its grace, a golden light emanating from its core, permeated the land, guiding the living and crucially preventing true death. When a being died in this new age, their soul would not pass on to an afterlife, but would instead return to the Erdtree, absorbed into its vast spiritual network. This cycle, while seemingly a form of immortality, was also a form of eternal stasis, a denial of true release. The Erdtree became the ultimate destination for all souls, a vast, complex repository of life force, ensuring that the Golden Order's influence extended even beyond the apparent end of individual existence. It was a constant, visible reminder of Marika's power and the greater will's pervasive presence, a beacon of golden light that cast its shadow over every corner of the lands between, promising eternal life, albeit a life devoid of true finality. To solidify her dominion and unite the disparate factions of the lands between under the Golden Order's banner, Marika took a consort, a powerful warrior who would serve as her first as Elden Lord. Her choice fell upon Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, a formidable and charismatic leader. Godfrey, known as Huara Lu in his barbaric past, was a chieftain of fierce warriors, a man of immense strength and unparalleled combat prowess. His ascension to Elden Lord marked a strategic alliance, combining Marika's divine authority with Godfrey's martial might. Together, they embarked on a grand campaign of conquest, their combined power an unstoppable force. Godfrey, adorned with a magnificent lion helmet and accompanied by his loyal beast, Serosh, became the living embodiment of the Golden Order's military might. He led Marika's armies, which included the formidable tarnished warriors who had lost the guidance of grace, but were still bound to the lands between in a series of brutal and decisive wars. These campaigns were not merely about territorial expansion. They were about imposing the Golden Order's will, eradicating resistance, and bringing all peoples and cultures under the dominion of the Erdtree and its golden light. Godfrey's ferocity in battle was legendary, his roar capable of shattering the morale of his enemies, and his unwavering loyalty to Marika and the Golden Order was absolute. One of Godfrey's earliest and most significant conquests was the defeat of the Mauls, Stormlord, the powerful ruler of Stormvale. The Stormlord, an ancient and enigmatic figure, presided over a realm characterized by tempestuous winds and formidable defenses. His defeat was a testament to Godfrey's strategic brilliance and the overwhelming power of the Golden Order's armies. The battle for Stormvale was a brutal affair, a clash of ancient powers against the burgeoning might of Marika's empire. Godfrey, leading from the front, engaged the Stormlord in a titanic struggle, ultimately emerging victorious. This victory was not merely a territorial gain, it was a symbolic triumph, demonstrating the Golden Order's ability to overcome even the most entrenched and formidable adversaries. The Stormlord's defeat sent a clear message across the lands between. Resistance to the Golden Order was futile. Stormvale, a strategic stronghold, fell under Marika's dominion, further expanding the reach and influence of her burgeoning empire. The conquest of Stormvale was a crucial step in the Golden Order's expansion, solidifying its hold on the central regions of the lands between and paving the way for even greater conquests. Following the subjugation of Stormvale and other smaller kingdoms, a far more significant conflict erupted, the Ys Giants' War. This was not merely a territorial dispute, but a clash of cosmic ideologies. The Fire Giants, an ancient race dwelling in the treacherous mountaintops of the Giants, worshipped an opposing outer god, the Fell God, a deity of primordial flame and destructive power. Their existence, with their worship of a rival cosmic entity, was anathema to the Golden Order's singular devotion to the greater will. Marika and Godfrey, therefore, sought to eradicate the Fire Giants, viewing them as a fundamental threat to the Golden Order's absolute authority. The war was a brutal and protracted affair, fought amidst the unforgiving blizzards and volcanic landscapes of the mountaintops. The Fire Giants, with their immense strength and mastery of flame, proved to be formidable adversaries, their ancient magic and fiery attacks posing a serious challenge to the Golden Order's forces. It was during this devastating conflict that Godfrey once again proved his unparalleled martial prowess. He confronted the fell god of the Fire Giants directly, a titanic entity of living flame and destructive power. The battle was cataclysmic, a clash of divine wills and physical might. Godfrey, with his unwavering resolve and the divine backing of the Golden Order, ultimately triumphed over the ancient deity. This victory was not without its cost, but it was decisive. The defeat of the Fell God led to the near extinction of the Fire Giants, their civilization shattered, their numbers decimated. As a grim trophy of this monumental victory, and as a means to prevent the resurgence of the Fell God's power, Godfrey forged the Gextuts, Giant's Braid, a powerful artifact crafted from the very essence of the defeated deity. This braid, imbued with the remnants of the Fell God's flame, became a potent symbol of the Golden Order's victory and a constant reminder of the destructive power it had overcome. The Giants' War was a defining moment in the Golden Order's history, solidifying its dominance over all other religious and cultural practices in the lands between, and further cementing Marika's and Godfrey's authority. The few remaining Fire Giants were cursed to tend the flame, forever bound to their defeat, a stark warning to any who would defy the Golden Order. As Marika and Godfrey's reign progressed, their union bore fruit in the form of powerful offspring, the demigods. These were not ordinary children, but beings of immense power, imbued with both Marika's divine essence and Godfrey's formidable strength. Among their notable children were Gixus Godwin the Golden, a paragon of chivalry and beloved by all, whose radiant presence brought joy and prosperity to the lands between. Morgoth the Omen King, a powerful but tragic figure born with the ancestral curse of the omens, yet fiercely loyal to the Erdtree and the Golden Order. and Besser Mog, Lord of Blood, another omen who, unlike his brother, harbored dark ambitions and would later pursue a path of forbidden power. These demigods, each possessing unique gifts and destinies, represented the pinnacle of the Golden Order's genetic lineage, their very existence a testament to the divine power that flowed through their royal blood. Their births further solidified the dynasty's claim to absolute rule, ensuring a line of powerful successors to uphold the Golden Order's tenets for generations to come. Each child was a reflection of the Golden Order's strength and its aspirations for eternal dominion, their lives intertwined with the fate of the lands between. With all significant foes vanquished, and the lands between firmly united under the Golden Order's rule, Godfrey, having fulfilled his purpose as a warrior and conqueror, reached a pivotal moment in his life. His role as the relentless general, the unyielding force that brought order through conquest, was complete. The greater will, through Marika, deemed his martial prowess no longer necessary. In a move that was both a reward and a profound exile, Godfrey was stripped of his grace, the golden light that had guided him and empowered him. This act was not a punishment, but a divine decree, a cessation of his divine mandate. With his grace gone, Godfrey was banished from the lands between, becoming the very first of the Tarnished. This exile was a complex act. It freed Godfrey from his duties, allowing him to pursue his own path, but it also removed him from the heart of power, preventing him from potentially challenging Marika's absolute authority. He was sent to the Badlands, a harsh and unforgiving land far from the golden glow of the Erdtree, to live out his days as a mortal man, stripped of his divine connection. His loyal warriors, those who had fought alongside him, also lost their grace and were exiled, following their lord into the wilderness. This event marked a profound shift in the Golden Order's leadership, transitioning from an era of conquest to one of consolidation and internal governance. Following Godfrey's departure, Marika took a new consort, her second Elden Lord, Radagon of the Golden Order. Radagon, a figure shrouded in mystery and possessing a profound connection to the Golden Order's principles, was a stark contrast to the warrior king Godfrey. He was a scholar, a sorcerer, and a devout follower of the Golden Order's tenets, embodying its intellectual and spiritual aspects. His union with Marika further solidified the Golden Order's power, not through martial conquest, but through a deeper integration of its philosophical and spiritual foundations. Radagon's presence at Marika's side symbolized a shift towards an era of internal development and refinement of the Golden Order's intricate doctrines. His connection to the Golden Order was so profound that rumors persisted of his true nature, hinting at a deeper, more intertwined relationship with Marika herself. Their marriage was a strategic move, reinforcing the Golden Order's intellectual and spiritual authority, complementing the martial power that had been established under Godfrey. Radagon's influence brought a new dimension to Marika's reign, emphasizing the scholarly and theological aspects of the Golden Order, ensuring its continued growth and dominance, not just through force, but through intellectual and spiritual persuasion. From the union of Marika and Radagon, even more powerful demigods were born, further expanding the royal lineage and solidifying the Golden Order's claim to eternal dominion. These offspring were exceptional, embodying the combined might and intellect of their divine parents. Among them were Aesixm, Makela the Unalloyed, a figure of profound beauty and immense power, cursed with eternal childhood, but possessing an unyielding will and a deep understanding of outer gods and their influence. Makela sought to cure his sister's affliction and was renowned for his ability to charm and command loyalty, even from those who were initially hostile. And then there was Malenia, Blade of Makela, the mightiest of the demigods, afflicted by the terrifying scarlet rot, a debilitating and corrupting disease. Despite her curse, Malenia was an unparalleled warrior, her skill with the blade legendary, her determination unwavering. Her very existence was a testament to both the immense power and the inherent vulnerabilities within the divine bloodline. These new demigods, with their unique gifts and tragic curses, further enriched the tapestry of the Golden Order's royal family, their destinies intricately woven into the fate of the lands between. Their births ensured a continuous line of powerful rulers, strengthening the Golden Order's grip on power and promising a future where its influence would remain unchallenged, at least for a time. The royal lineage, now boasting a new generation of powerful and enigmatic demigods, seemed unassailable, its power and influence reaching unprecedented heights, setting the stage for an era of unparalleled stability and authority under the Golden Order's unwavering rule. And so, as the golden age of the Erdtree stretched across the lands between, a pivotal and enigmatic chapter began to unfold in the ancient past, specifically around the period of Godfrey's exile. This era marks a profound shift in the destiny of the lands between and sets the stage for the very journey you, the player, will eventually undertake. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, a figure of immense power and legendary martial prowess, had by this point fulfilled his grand purpose. He had led Marika's forces, the Golden Host, in their tireless campaigns, conquering the giants, subjugating the Stormhawks, and uniting the lands between under the dominion of the Erdtree. His hands, once stained with the blood of countless foes, had brought a semblance of peace, albeit one forged through brutal conquest. Yet with the cessation of war, with no more worthy adversaries to challenge his boundless strength, a curious and ultimately tragic transformation began within him. The very essence of his being, inextricably linked to his role as a warrior and conqueror, started to wane. The Erdtree, that colossal, luminous tree that stood as the very symbol of the Golden Order and the source of its divine grace, began to withdraw its blessing from him. This withdrawal wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but rather a gradual, almost imperceptible fading. The most striking manifestation of this loss was in his eyes. The vibrant, golden aura that had once shone from Godfrey's gaze, a visible sign of the Erdtree's grace flowing within him, slowly dimmed. It was as if the light of the divine had been extinguished, leaving behind eyes that were dull, lifeless, and devoid of their former fiery passion. This physical change was a direct reflection of his spiritual and martial decline. Without war, without the constant struggle that defined him, Godfrey, the great warrior, had lost his purpose, and with it, his connection to the Erdtree's divine favor. And this wasn't a punishment, but rather a natural consequence of his completed task. A curious paradox where success led to spiritual decline. The Erdtree, in its inscrutable wisdom, no longer saw a need for its champion in his current state. It was in this context with Godfrey's grace visibly diminished, that Queen Marika the Eternal, his divine consort and sovereign of the lands between, made a momentous and seemingly cruel decision. She exiled Godfrey and his entire host of warriors from the lands between. This wasn't merely a banishment, it was a profound severance, a declaration that their time within the sacred lands had come to an end. The reasons behind Marika's actions are shrouded in mystery, a recurring theme throughout the history of the lands between, and one that hints at a far grander, more intricate plan at play. The exile wasn't limited to Godfrey alone. Every warrior who had fought under his banner, every retainer, every knight, and indeed their descendants, were also stripped of the Erdtree's grace. This was a collective punishment, or perhaps a collective transformation. The golden light that once illuminated their eyes, the subtle shimmer of divine favor that marked them as chosen, vanished. They became, in essence, ungraced. This loss of grace was not just a symbolic gesture, it was a fundamental alteration of their being. The Erdtree's grace was more than just a blessing. It was a guiding light, a source of strength, and a connection to the fundamental laws of the Golden Order. To lose it was to lose a part of oneself, to be cast adrift from the divine current that permeated the lands between. These exiled warriors, now bereft of their grace and their connection to the Erdtree, became known as the Tarnished. The name itself, Tarnished, speaks volumes, suggesting a blemish, a dullness, a loss of luster. They were no longer the shining champions of the Golden Order. They were outsiders, cast out and forgotten by the very power they once served. This marked the birth of a new lineage, a people defined by their exile and their lack of divine favor. Their fate was to wander beyond the fog-shrouded shores of the lands between, to live and die in obscurity, far from the golden glow of the Erdtree. Godfrey, now stripped of his title as Elden Lord and his divine grace, reverted to his former identity, one forged in a harsher, more brutal land, Hora-Lu, chieftain of the Badlands. This transformation was both physical and symbolic. He shed the regal trappings of the Elden Lord, embracing the primal ferocity of his past. He bound his spirit to Sarosh, the spirit lion, not as a symbol of power, but as a means to control his own untamed ferocity, a beast within that he constantly struggled to keep in check. It was as Hora-Lu that he led his newly formed Tarnished out of the lands between. Their journey was one of hardship and relentless struggle, a constant fight for survival in harsh, unforgiving lands beyond the Erdtree's benevolent influence. The Tarnished were, in essence, cursed to wander. Their destiny was to fight, to die, and to be forgotten in the vast, untamed wilderness outside the lands between. They faced endless battles, not for glory or divine favor, but for sheer survival. Their lives were harsh, their deaths often meaningless in the grand scheme of things. This period of exile, spanning countless generations, was a crucible that forged a resilient, if embittered, people. They were defined by their struggle, their enduring spirit in the face of insurmountable odds, and their inherent ability to rise again after death, a curious trait that would later prove crucial. Yet, as with all of Marika's grand schemes, there was a deeper layer, a hidden purpose behind this seemingly cruel banishment. Her true motives for the exile of Godfrey and the Tarnished remain one of the most enduring mysteries of the ancient past. Was it simply a pragmatic decision to remove a warrior who had outlived his usefulness? Or was it, as many scholars speculate, a calculated move, a piece of a much larger, intricate puzzle she was assembling. The prevailing theory, supported by fragmented lore and whispered legends, points towards the latter. Marika, with her prophetic vision and her deep understanding of the Golden Order's intricate workings, foresaw a future where the lands between would be plunged into chaos, a future where the Elden Ring itself might shatter. In this foreseen future, she envisioned a time when the tarnished, those very exiles she had cast out, would be the only ones capable of returning to claim the Elden Ring and restore order. This wasn't a sudden revelation, but a carefully orchestrated plan unfolding over millennia. Marika, in her infinite wisdom, understood the nature of ambition and the power of a desperate heart. By exiling the tarnished, by forcing them to endure hardship and struggle, she was, in a twisted way, cultivating their resilience, their hunger for something more, something lost. She strategically planted the seed of ambition within the tarnished. This wasn't a physical seed, but a spiritual one, a latent desire for greatness, a yearning for the grace they had lost. She knew that by stripping them of their grace, she would paradoxically make them the ideal candidates for its eventual return. They would be unburdened by the existing power structures of the lands between, free from the dogma and corruption that would eventually plague the Golden Order. They would be outsiders, capable of seeing the world with fresh eyes, driven by a primal desire to reclaim what was once theirs. This ambition, carefully nurtured through generations of struggle, would be the very force that would compel them to return. And so, the tarnished were destined to die and be resurrected. This unique ability to return from death was not a mere quirk, but a fundamental aspect of Marika's plan. Each death, each resurrection was a lesson, a refinement of their spirit, a strengthening of their resolve. Their grace, though initially lost, was not entirely extinguished. It would lie dormant, waiting for the opportune moment to reawaken. And when that moment arrived, when the lands between were plunged into despair and the Elden Ring lay shattered, that dormant grace would stir. It would manifest as a guiding light, an invisible thread pulling them back across the treacherous seas, through the perilous fog, and into the heart of the lands between. This return would not be a mere homecoming. It would be a divine summons, a call to destiny, orchestrated by Marika herself, centuries in the making. The tarnished, once cast out, would become the chosen, their very exile a testament to their ultimate purpose. And so, with Godfrey and his tarnished warriors banished from the lands between, a period of uneasy peace settled over the Erdtree's golden glow. But this tranquility was a fleeting illusion, merely the calm before the storm, for in the recent past, the very foundation of the Golden Order itself would be irrevocably shattered. This era, known chillingly as the Shattering, marks the cataclysmic unraveling of Queen Marika's reign and the descent of the lands between into utter chaos. The precipitating event, shrouded in mystery and speculation, was Queen Marika's unthinkable act. She shattered the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring, as we've discussed, is the fundamental concept of order in the lands between, a divine construct embodying the very laws of the world. Why Marika, the very vessel of this order, would commit such an act remains one of the most enduring enigmas of this age. Some scholars whisper of a profound despair, a rebellion against the greater will itself, the outer god that bestowed the Elden Ring upon her. Others speculate it was a desperate gambit, a bid to reshape the world in a new image, or perhaps to free herself and her children from a perceived divine tyranny. Whatever her true motives, the consequences were immediate and apocalyptic. The Elden Ring, once a cohesive whole, splintered into numerous fragments, each imbued with immense power. These fragments, now known as Great Runes, were scattered across the vast and varied landscapes of the lands between, becoming prizes of unimaginable potency. Naturally, Marika's demigod children, her direct descendants, and the scions of her power were the first to claim these scattered great runes. Each demigod, already possessing a measure of divine essence, found their power amplified to an unprecedented degree by these shards of the Elden Ring. They became living embodiments of raw, untamed power, their ambitions and desires magnified tenfold. This sudden influx of power, however, did not lead to a unified front or a new era of prosperity. Instead, it ignited the flames of discord and avarice amongst them, setting the stage for the devastating conflicts that would soon follow. But before the full-scale war erupted, a more insidious and devastating event transpired, one that would forever scar the soul of the lands between. The Rune of Death, a crucial component of the Elden Ring that had been sealed away by Marika herself to prevent true death, was stolen. The perpetrator of this audacious act was none other than Ranni, one of Marika's Empyrean children, a demigod destined for godhood. Ranni, driven by her own inscrutable motives and a desire to escape the predetermined path laid out by the greater will, orchestrated the theft with cunning and precision. Her target for the Rune of Death's first true application was none other than Godwyn the Golden, Marika's beloved firstborn son, and the epitome of grace and valor. Godwyn, a paragon amongst the demigods, was the first to truly die, his soul extinguished by the stolen Rune of Death. This event was a profound shock to the Golden Order, as true death had been absent from the lands between since Marika had sealed away the rune. The instrument of Godwyn's demise and the agents of this unprecedented act of deicide were the Black Knives. Those shadowy assassins, imbued with the power of the stolen Rune of Death, carried out what would become known as the Night of Black Knives. Under the cloak of darkness, they infiltrated the golden capital, Lindell, and struck down Godwyn. The blades they wielded were steeped in the power of the Rune of Death, capable of severing the very soul from the body. This night of terror sent shockwaves through the lands between, shattering the illusion of invincibility surrounding the demigods and demonstrating the terrifying potential of the newly unleashed Rune of Death. The death of Godwyn was not a simple matter of his passing. While his soul was extinguished, his body, for reasons still debated by scholars, remained. This paradox of a soulless body, infused with the lingering power of the Rune of Death, became a grotesque entity known as the Prince of Death. His corrupting influence began to spread, intertwining with the very roots of the Erdtree, the colossal golden tree that stands as the symbol of the Golden Order. This insidious corruption, a blight upon the very lifeblood of the lands between, would manifest in various forms of undeath and decay, forever altering the natural cycle of life and death. Ranni, having achieved her objective of using the Rune of Death to kill Godwyn's soul, then took an even more drastic step to further her agenda. To escape the pervasive influence of the greater will, the outer god that sought to control her destiny as an Empyrean, she cast aside her Empyrean flesh. In a ritual of self sacrifice, she used the rune of death to kill her own body, severing her connection to the physical world and the greater will's grasp. Her soul, however, persisted, inhabiting a doll like form, allowing her to continue her machinations from the shadows, free from the constraints of her former existence. This act solidified her rebellion and set her on a path distinct from the other demigods, a path towards a new age, a new order. With the Elden Ring shattered and its complete order absent, the lands between were plunged into an unprecedented era of chaos. The laws of the world, once immutable and divinely enforced, began to fray. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and distort in places, and the natural order of things was irrevocably disrupted. This void of authority and order created a power vacuum that the newly empowered demigods, each wielding a great rune, were all too eager to fill, leading directly to the devastating conflicts of the shattering. Among the most destructive of these conflicts was the cataclysmic clash between two of Marika's most formidable children, Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and Radagon, Star Scourge. Malenia, an Empyrean and twin sister to Miquella, was a warrior of unparalleled skill, renowned for her elegant yet deadly combat prowess. However, she was also cursed with the scarlet rot, a horrific and incurable disease that slowly consumed her body. Radagon, a colossal warrior who had mastered gravitational magic, was a force of nature, capable of holding back the very stars. Their battle, a legendary confrontation of immense power, took place in the region of Caelid, a once vibrant land that would forever bear the scars of their conflict. The duel between Malenia and Radagon was a spectacle of destruction, a clash of demigod that reshaped the very landscape. In the throes of their desperate struggle, Malenia, pushed to her limits and consumed by the scarlet rot, unleashed its full, devastating power. This act of desperation transformed Caelid into a blighted wasteland, a land of perpetual decay and crimson rot. The scarlet rot, once confined to Malenia's body, spread like wildfire across the region, infecting the very earth, flora, and fauna. It became a living, breathing plague, turning once fertile lands into a grotesque, festering testament to the demigod's destructive power. Radagon, though immensely powerful, was ultimately overwhelmed by the unleashed rot, his mind shattered, reduced to a feral beast wandering the blighted wastes. Malenia, too, was gravely wounded, falling into a deep slumber after expending so much of her strength. Meanwhile, Malenia's twin brother, Miquella, another Empyrean and a being of immense wisdom and compassion, sought to alleviate his sister's suffering and establish a new, more benevolent order. Miquella, who possessed the unique ability to compel affection and respect, was also afflicted by an eternal childhood, a curse that prevented him from maturing. He dedicated himself to finding a cure for Malenia's scarlet rot and to creating a new, unalloyed golden order, one that would be free from the flaws and curses of the current Erdtree. To this end, he began to cultivate the Erdtree, a gigantic golden tree intended to rival or even surpass the Erdtree, a sanctuary for the downtrodden and a symbol of his new vision. He poured his very essence into its growth, hoping to create a haven where all could flourish and where the scarlet rot could finally be cured. However, Miquella's noble endeavors were tragically interrupted. While he slumbered within the nascent Erdtree, Nurturing its growth and working towards his grand vision, he was abducted. His captor was Mog, Lord of Blood, another of Marika's demigod children, albeit one born of a different lineage, a child of Radagon and Marika's second union. Mog, a devotee of an outer god, known as the Formless Mother, harbored a twisted ambition to elevate Miquella to godhood, not through Miquella's own benevolent design, but through a bloody and perverse ritual. Mog believed that by corrupting Miquella and marrying him into his own twisted bloodline, he could establish a new dynasty, a Mogwin dynasty, with Miquella as its divine consort. This abduction was a profound blow to the hope for a new order, as Miquella, the gentle and compassionate Empyrean, was now held captive, his fate uncertain. Amidst this escalating chaos and the internecine struggles of his more powerful siblings, Godric the Grafted, a descendant of Godfrey and Marika, found himself in a precarious position. Possessing a great rune, but lacking the inherent strength and prestige of his more formidable demigod relatives, Godric was consumed by fear and a desperate desire for power. Fearing the wrath and ambition of the other demigods, he fortified Stormvale Castle, his ancestral seat, transforming it into a formidable stronghold. But his fear manifested in a far more grotesque manner. He began to graft limbs onto himself, harvesting the body parts of defeated warriors and even innocent citizens. This horrific practice, a desperate attempt to gain strength and power, transformed him into a monstrous amalgamation of flesh and steel, a testament to his insecurity and depravity. He believed that by accumulating more power, even through such barbaric means, he could withstand the onslaught of his siblings and assert his own claim to dominance. And so, with the Elden Ring shattered, its fragments claimed by warring demigods, and the very fabric of the lands between unraveling, the inevitable occurred. The demigods, each wielding immense power and driven by their own ambitions, fears, and twisted desires, began warring amongst themselves. This devastating conflict, a brutal and protracted struggle for dominance, became known as the Shattering. It was a war fought not for noble ideals, but for power and control, a war that laid waste to vast swathes of the lands between, leaving behind a legacy of destruction, despair, and untold suffering. The once golden age of the Erdtree was now a distant memory, replaced by the grim reality of endless conflict and a world teetering on the brink of utter ruin. The repercussions of this cataclysmic era would forever shape the destiny of the lands between, and indeed the fate of any who would dare to tread its blighted paths. The age of Marika's unchallenged reign, though seemingly eternal, was irrevocably shattered by the fateful night of Black Knives, an event that plunged the lands between into an era of unprecedented chaos. It is in this recent past, following the theft of destined death and the subsequent shattering of the Elden Ring, that we witness the devastating conflict known as the War of the Demigods. Marika's children, the demigods, each a scion of divine lineage, found themselves at the precipice of an existential crisis, a power vacuum left by their mother's mysterious disappearance and the fractured nature of their world's governing artifact. In the immediate aftermath of the Elden Ring's fragmentation, these demigods, driven by a combination of ambition, duty, and perhaps a touch of madness, inherited from their complex parentage, began to claim the great runes. These great runes were not merely symbolic trinkets, They were literal fragments of the shattered Elden Ring itself, each imbued with a portion of its immense, reality shaping power. The act of possessing these runes, though initially perhaps a means of restoring order or asserting authority, inadvertently served to corrupt their wielders. The raw, untamed power flowing through their veins amplified their existing traits, turning nascent ambitions into raging infernos of desire and escalating personal quirks into monstrous obsessions. One of the most stark examples of this corruption was Godric the Grafted. Once a minor demigod, a distant descendant of Godfrey through Marika, Godric was consumed by a profound sense of inadequacy and a desperate craving for strength. The great rune he claimed, likely the great rune of the Grafted, did not temper this desire but rather inflamed it, pushing him to extreme and grotesque measures. He began a horrifying practice, grafting the limbs of defeated warriors, both human and tarnished, onto his own body. This wasn't merely a symbolic act, it was a literal, physical manifestation of his insatiable hunger for power, a grotesque attempt to absorb the strength of others and compensate for his own perceived weakness. His castle, Stormvale, became a grim testament to his depravity, its walls echoing with the screams of his victims, and its halls filled with the macabre sight of his ever-growing, multi-limbed form. He believed that by accumulating the strength of countless others, he could ascend to a position of true power, perhaps even challenge the more formidable demigods. His methods, however, only served to highlight his desperation and earned him the contempt of his more powerful siblings. As the great runes fueled the demigod's ambitions, the fragile peace of the lands between crumbled entirely, giving way to open warfare. Among the most formidable combatants were Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and Star Scourge Radagon. Malenia, a demigod of unparalleled martial prowess, was afflicted by the Scarlet Rot, a devastating and incurable disease that slowly consumed her body. Despite this debilitating condition, her skill with the blade was legendary, and her devotion to her twin brother, Miquella, was absolute. Radagon, a giant of a man and a master of gravity magic, was a demigod of immense physical strength and tactical genius, having trained under a master of gravity sorcery and developing a powerful bond with his beloved steed, Leonard. Their clash was inevitable, a cataclysmic event that would forever scar the landscape and the souls of those involved. Their fated encounter took place in the Caelid Wilds, a region that would bear the brunt of their devastating power. The specifics of their initial confrontation are shrouded in the fog of war, but what is known is that their battle was a prolonged and brutal affair, a true test of their respective strengths and wills. Radagon, with his mastery of gravity, could call down meteorites and crush his enemies with immense force, while Malenia, despite her rot, moved with a grace and precision that belied her affliction, her blade a whirlwind of death. As the battle raged, reaching a fever pitch, Malenia, pushed to her absolute limits, made a desperate and ultimately tragic choice. To overcome Radagon's overwhelming power, she unleashed the Scarlet Aeonia, a devastating bloom of the Scarlet Rot. This was not merely an attack, it was a self-sacrificing act, a full manifestation of her dormant affliction. The Scarlet Aeonia exploded outwards, a crimson wave of pestilence that engulfed not only Radagon, but also the entirety of the Caelid Wilds. The land itself was irrevocably blighted, transformed into a festering wasteland of scarlet flowers, mutated creatures, and a perpetually oppressive atmosphere. Malenia, in unleashing this power, also succumbed more fully to the rot herself, falling into a deep slumber, her body ravaged by the disease. Radagon, despite his immense power and resilience, was not immune to the scarlet rot's corrosive effects. The blast, combined with the lingering infection, drove him utterly mad. His mind, once sharp and strategic, was reduced to a primal, instinctual state. He became a mindless beast, a gargantuan figure condemned to forever wander the blighted plains of Caelid, his only remaining purpose to guard the stars, a task he had undertaken in his sanity to prevent their movement, believing it would harm his beloved horse. His once proud army, the Redmanes, remained loyal even in his madness, tending to his needs and attempting to contain his destructive impulses. The clash between Malenia and Radagon was but one, albeit the most devastating example of the widespread conflict that engulfed the lands between. The demigods, empowered by their great runes, each believed themselves to be the rightful heir to the Elden Ring, or at least the most capable of wielding its power. This led to a series of brutal, internecine wars, a free-for-all for supremacy. This devastating conflict, marked by countless skirmishes, sieges, and pitched battles, became known simply as the Shattering War. Each demigod, with their unique powers and ambitions, carved out their own territory and waged war against their siblings, or against any who stood in their way. Morgott, the Omen King, fiercely defended the Erdtree and Leyndell, the royal capital, from all invaders, driven by a deep-seated loyalty to his mother, Marika, despite his own cursed existence. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, embraced the forbidden power of the god-devouring serpent, seeking to defy the greater will and devour the very gods themselves. Godwyn's half-brother, Mogg, Lord of Blood, driven by a twisted devotion to the outer god of the formless mother, sought to establish an entirely new dynasty with Miquella as his consort. The motivations were varied, but the outcome was always the same: destruction and bloodshed. Amidst this widespread devastation, some demigods chose different paths. Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, once the consort of Radagon and mother to Ranni, Radagon, and Rykard, found herself unable to participate in the brutal conflict. Heartbroken by Radagon's departure to become Marika's second consort and the subsequent fracturing of her family, she retreated to the Academy of Raya Lucarian. There, surrounded by her loyal Carian knights and the scholars of the Academy, she immersed herself in the study of glintstone sorcery, her grief manifesting as a profound melancholia. She became a figure of immense power within the Academy, capable of rebirth, but her spirit was broken, rendering her largely inert in the larger political and military struggles of the Shattering. Her inaction, while a personal tragedy, also served to preserve the knowledge and traditions of the Carian royal family, a beacon of intellectual pursuit amidst the encroaching darkness. She was not a combatant in the Shattering in the same vein as her children, but her influence, particularly through her daughter, Ranni's machinations, would still play a crucial role in the unfolding narrative. Meanwhile, Miquella, Malenia's twin brother and a demigod of immense compassion and intellect, pursued his own ambitious project. Afflicted by eternal childhood and a curse that prevented him from maturing, Miquella sought a cure not only for his own condition, but also for his beloved sister's scarlet rot. He believed that through his own efforts, he could elevate himself to godhood, bypassing the greater will and establishing a new order free from the influence of the outer gods. To this end, he created the Erdtree, a magnificent, colossal tree grown from his own blood, intended as a sanctuary for all who were forsaken by the Erdtree and a vessel for his ascension. He poured his immense spiritual energy into its growth, nurturing it with his own essence. However, Miquella's noble aspirations were tragically cut short. Before he could fully realize his potential or cure Malenia, he was abducted by Mog, Lord of Blood, his half-brother. Mog, obsessed with the outer god of the formless mother, sought to use Miquella's unalloyed divinity to establish a new dynasty, making Miquella his consort, and eventually a new god. This abduction left the Erdtree incomplete, and Malenia bereft of her brother's healing presence, further deepening her despair and leaving her vulnerable. Mog's actions were a profound betrayal, not only of Miquella, but also of the fragile hope for a peaceful resolution to the demigods' various afflictions. The cumulative effect of these individual struggles and the overarching shattering war was catastrophic. The lands between, once a golden realm blessed by the Erdtree, were ravaged beyond recognition. Ancient cities lay in ruins, once fertile lands were blighted and barren, and countless lives were lost. The common folk, caught between the warring demigods, suffered immensely, their homes destroyed, their families scattered, and their hopes extinguished. The very fabric of society unraveled, replaced by banditry, despair, and the constant threat of violence. The once clear path to the Erdtree, the symbol of Marika's reign and the greater will's influence, became obscured by the dust of war and the blood of the fallen. Despite the immense power wielded by each demigod and the ferocity of their campaigns, no single demigod could claim ultimate victory. Their powers, though formidable, were often balanced by those of their siblings, leading to stalemates and Pyrrhic victories. The great runes, while granting immense strength, also amplified their flaws and prevented them from truly uniting. Furthermore, no one demigod possessed the ability, or perhaps the understanding, to reforge the Elden Ring, the ultimate prize. The shattered fragments remained scattered, their power held by individuals who were too consumed by their own desires to truly comprehend their significance. The war, therefore, eventually ground to a brutal and exhausting stalemate, leaving the lands between in a state of utter ruin, a fractured land mirroring the fractured artifact at its heart. The demigods, exhausted and battered, retreated to their respective strongholds, their ambitions unfulfilled, their hopes dashed. The greater will, the enigmatic cosmic entity that had guided Marika, remained silent, seemingly indifferent to the suffering below. It was at this point, recognizing the intractable impasse and the continuing devastation, that the two fingers, the direct emissaries of the greater will, began to act. With no demigod capable of uniting the lands between or mending the Elden Ring, a new solution was required. The two fingers, sensing the dire need for a new Elden Lord, began the arduous process of summoning the Tarnished back to the lands between. The Tarnished, once exiled from the grace of the Erdtree and banished from the lands between, were now called back, their guidance restored, their purpose renewed. They were the forgotten champions, the discarded warriors, now tasked with a monumental undertaking, to journey through the ravaged lands, defeat the demigods, claim their great runes, and ultimately become the Elden Lord, thereby restoring order to a broken world. This summons marked a new chapter in the history of the lands between, a desperate gamble by the greater will to salvage what remained of its dominion. The stage was set for the arrival of a new protagonist, an outsider who would navigate the treacherous landscape of demigod rivalries and ancient curses, all in pursuit of a shattered crown and a fractured destiny. And so, after centuries of silence and decay, we arrive at the present day, the era of what is known as the Call. It is a time when the very fabric of the lands between, long fractured and stagnant, begins to stir with a new, albeit desperate, hope. For generations, the tarnished, those who had lost the golden grace of the Erdtree and were exiled from the lands between, had wandered the fringes of existence, forgotten and forlorn. Their eyes, once touched by the golden light, had grown dim, their purpose lost to the mists of time. But now, in a twist of fate that defies the long night, that very grace, the radiant blessing of the Erdtree, which had been withdrawn from them so long ago, begins to return. It is a faint, almost imperceptible flicker at first, a whisper of golden light in the darkness, but it is enough. This reawakening of grace acts as an irresistible summons, a silent, powerful call echoing across the vast oceans and forgotten lands, drawing the exiled back to their ancestral home. The tarnished, scattered across the distant reaches of the world, respond to this inexplicable pull. They are a diverse lot, some hardened warriors, others fallen nobles, scholars, or even simple folk, all united by this shared ancient lineage and the sudden undeniable resurgence of grace within them. Among these returning exiles is, of course, the player character you. You too feel the insistent tug, the golden light rekindling in your faded eyes, guiding you across the treacherous waters back to the shores of the lands between. The journey is arduous, fraught with unknown perils, but the guidance of grace is undeniable, a beacon in the encroaching gloom. You, like countless others, awaken disoriented and adrift, having washed ashore at the Chapel of Anticipation. This dilapidated structure, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning sea, serves as the initial landing point for many of the returning tarnished. Its crumbling stone and overgrown foliage speak of an age long past, a forgotten sanctuary now repurposed as a gateway to a shattered realm. However, your return is not met with open arms or welcoming solace. The lands between, even at its very threshold, remains a perilous and unforgiving place. The Chapel of Anticipation is not unguarded. Lurking within its decaying halls is a grotesque and formidable creature known as the Grafted Scion. This monstrosity, a horrifying amalgamation of human limbs and other less discernible parts, is a testament to the depraved experiments and the rampant madness that has gripped the lands between since the shattering. Its multiple arms, each wielding a different weapon, flail with savage abandon, a whirlwind of steel and flesh. The Grafted Scion serves as the Tarnished's first true challenge, a brutal and an immediate introduction to the harsh realities of this fallen world. It is a test of mettle, a trial by fire designed to weed out the weak and to impress upon the returning exiles the sheer scale of the dangers they now face. For most, including you, this initial encounter ends in swift and decisive defeat. The Scion's overwhelming power, its relentless assault, quickly overwhelms the unprepared tarnished. But death, in the lands between, is often not an end, but a transition. Upon your defeat by the monstrous Grafted Scion, you are not simply extinguished. Instead, through a mysterious and unexplained mechanism, you are transported or perhaps resurrected to the stranded graveyard. This eerie subterranean cavern, illuminated by an unsettling blue glow, serves as a sort of purgatory or staging ground for the newly arrived tarnished. Here, amidst the skeletal remains of countless others who have met their end, you are given a chance to regroup, to understand, however vaguely, the nature of your predicament. The air is heavy with the scent of decay and the lingering echoes of lost souls. It is a somber and unsettling place, designed to disorient and to humble. It is within the confines of this grim graveyard that you encounter Vare, a mysterious and enigmatic figure clad in white robes, his face obscured by a mask. Vare is the first sentient being you truly interact with, and his words are far from comforting. He greets you with a condescending tone, immediately mocking your maidenless status. In the lands between, a maiden is a crucial companion for a tarnished, someone who can channel the power of the Erdtree and convert runes, the fragments of life and experience shed by defeated foes, into strength. Without a maiden, a tarnished is unable to grow stronger, to level up, effectively rendering them powerless against the formidable challenges ahead. Vare's taunts, though seemingly cruel, serve a purpose: to ignite a spark of ambition, a desire to prove him wrong. He directs you, albeit dismissively, towards the guidance of grace, the golden light that emanates from the sights of grace scattered throughout the land, urging you to follow its path. His words, though delivered with a sneer, reveal the overarching purpose of your return: to gather the great runes, the shattered fragments of the Elden Ring, and in doing so, to become the Elden Lord. This ancient title, once held by Marika, the Eternal Queen, represents ultimate authority and power over the lands between. The Elden Ring, once the very source of order and law, now lies shattered, its fragments, the great runes, held by the demigods, Marika's offspring, who have descended into madness and tyranny. Your quest, therefore, is not merely a personal one, but a cosmic undertaking, a desperate attempt to mend the broken world and restore balance. As you emerge from the stranded graveyard and venture into the vast expanse of the lands between, the full extent of its desolation becomes brutally apparent. This is no longer the verdant, prosperous realm described in ancient tales.